Okay, so Solomon's officials and governors. So we're not going to go over this with a fine-tooth comb, but there is a couple things that I want to kind of point out. So it says in verse 1, chapter 4, it says, So King Solomon ruled over all of Israel, and these were his chief officials. And then it goes down a long list of people, essentially about 12 of them. Then it goes to Solomon, verse 7, it says, Solomon had 12 district governors all over Israel, who supplied provisions for the king and the royal household. Each one had to provide supplies for 1 month in the year. And their names are, and it's not lost on me, the very first one is Ben-Hur. So now we know what he was doing after the movie. So you got all these other different names again that's going to kind of go down the list until the very end. When it sits there and it talks about Gaber, son of Uri in Gilead, the country of Sihon, king of the Ammonites, and the country of Og, the king of Bashan. He was the only governor over that particular district. So again, we're not going to go over all this with a fine-tooth comb, but there is one thing that I want to point out when it comes to it, and that is there is a very, very different way of reigning over Israel between David and Solomon. David was a warrior king. He was somebody that everybody looked at as far as how strong he was. They looked at his leadership. Yes, he made some really boneheaded mistakes, but he was a warrior king. He was somebody that was expanding out through war and through conflict and basically making everybody bow down to him. Solomon is the exact opposite. Solomon will never fight in a war. So his entire reign will be peacetime. Everything that he does is diplomatically. But everything that he does is, again, that's the gift that he asked for from God. Even though God overdid it and he basically gave him this incredible intellect, what he asked for was the intellect and the wisdom to administrate, because he knew he wasn't going to do it very well. He was kind of out of his league. So now here we see he has just become the president of a Fortune 500 company. Okay, he has governors all over the place. He has people ruling smaller areas. He is learning to administrate problems so that way it doesn't all fall upon him. He is doing this in a completely different way than David did. So that really kind of goes to his character and how exactly he looks at this. But it sits there and says in verse 20, the people of Judah and Israel were as numerous as sand on the seashore. They ate, they drank, and they were happy. And Solomon ruled over all the kingdoms from the Euphrates River to the land of the Philistines as far as the border of Egypt. These countries brought tribute and were Solomon's subjects all of his life. Solomon's daily provisions were 30 cores of the finest flour, 60 cores of meal, 10 head, and when it talks about cores, we're talking literally about tons. 10 heads of stall-fed cattle, 20 of pasture-fed cattle, and 100 sheep and goat, as well as deer, gazelles, roebucks, and choice fowl. For he ruled over all the kingdoms of the west of the Euphrates River, from Tipshah to Gaza, and had peace on all sides. During Solomon's lifetime, Judah and Israel from Dan to Beersheba lived in safety, and everyone under their own vine and under their own fig tree. Solomon had 4,000 stalls for chariot horses and 12,000 horses. The district governors, each in his month, supplied provisions for King Solomon and all who came to the king's table. They saw to it that nothing was lacking, and they also brought to the proper place for their quotas of barley and straw for the chariot horses and other horses. So essentially, they're not just ruling over their own particular people, these governors. Each one of them is charged of handling Solomon's business for 1 month out of the year. They basically take from their stock and they say, okay, this is now going to the king, and they know this in advance. So it would be like us being the United States of America, and let's say that all 50 states are divided into 12 regions, and every month one of those regions would pay all the taxes for the country and everything and all the supplies and stuff like that to the federal government, and they only did that for 1 month out of the year, and it would rotate between these 12 regions. It's kind of what's going on here. Now, even God calls this a double-edged sword, okay? There's a blessing to this, but there's also kind of a curse to this. Because, yes, he is an amazing administrator. Everything that he is doing is working. All of the people are happy now. Okay, everything is going great. However, this is now becoming where everything is bountiful. And he is starting to do things that he's not supposed to do. Now, this statement that we just read is more of an overall of his life. We're going to kind of see, it's going to kind of go back a little bit, and you're going to see how this all comes about. But the point is that there are many, many things that the king is not supposed to do. And he's going to break pretty much every one of them. And he's already started by what we've read here. He has literal cities for his chariots. He has literal cities for his horses. He has gone back to Egypt. We've already read that part, to get a wife for himself. That is a trade agreement with Egypt. That's why he has peace on all sides, is because he's marrying everybody. Okay? They're not supposed to have a bunch of wives. Why? Because of sexual immorality? Well, I mean, people could argue that, but that's really not the reason. The reason is you have a bunch of wives. All of those wives are going to form some form of an influence over you. Okay? And that's exactly what happens. By the time we get to Solomon, where he's literally sacrificing children, he's not doing it because he's having a bad day. He's doing it because he's following the wills of his wives. So, don't throw nothing at me. I'm not one writing the book. So, at the end of the day, this is we can already see how this is already starting to go south. So, it said, God gave Solomon wisdom and very great insight. God gave Solomon wisdom and very great insight, and the breadth of understanding is measureless as the sand on the seashore. Solomon's wisdom was greater than the wisdom of all the people of the east, and greater of all the people of Egypt, or all the wisdom of Egypt, sorry. He was wiser than anyone else, including Ethan the Ezrahite, wiser than He-Man. Who's wiser than He-Man? He's got the sword of power. So Calcol and Darda and the sons of Mahol, and his fame spread to all the surrounding nations. He spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs numbered 1,005. He spoke about plant life, from the cedars of Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of walls. He also spoke about animals and birds, reptiles and fish. From all nations, people came to listen to Solomon's wisdom, sent by all the kings of the world who had heard of his wisdom. So, he's wiser than anybody else. He's interested in all sorts of things, okay? This isn't just, one particular thing like he's an idiot savant. He's literally interested in all sorts of things. He's studied all sorts of things. Okay, and not only has he studied it and learned what everybody else knows about it, he's wise and he's come to his own conclusions about a lot of these things. However, that wisdom comes from God. It's a supernatural wisdom. It's the exact same kind of thing that's going on when the people that were building the Ark of the Covenant, they were fine craftsmen, but God gave them a supernatural ability not only to be exceptional craftsmen, but to also know exactly what the ark is supposed to look like. They could literally see it in their head. Okay? That is what God is doing to Solomon, which makes everything that he's doing and everything that he's going to do all the worse. Because he knows that this gift comes from God. He's not oblivious to that fact. He literally asked for it. So, it says, when Hiram, king of Tyre, heard that Solomon had been anointed king to succeed his father, he sent his envoys to Solomon because he had always been on friendly terms with David. Well, that's true. Hiram, king of Tyre, was the first king ever to recognize David as king. And we've talked about that back in 1st and 2nd Samuel. When David becomes king, by all technicalities, he had no right to be king. There were many other people and everything that were Solomon's heirs that should have been, or not Solomon's heirs, but Saul's heirs that should have been king. David became king because David was anointed by God to become king. But after he became king, Hiram was the first king from another country that sat there and said, I recognize David's kingship. That was why bringing the Ark of the Covenant to the city of David was so important, because what better stamp of approval could you get to sit there and say, God wants me to be king, than God literally lives next door. So that was the whole point of that endeavor. So Hiram, king of Tyre, sits there and says, okay, so this Solomon guy, he's now king. David anointed him king. God's obviously behind it. So we're going to go ahead and make friends. So he says, Solomon sent back this message to Hiram. You know that because of the wars waged against my father David from all sides, he could not build a temple for the name of the Lord his God until the Lord put his enemies under his feet. But now the Lord my God has given me rest on every side, and there is no adversary or disaster, that I intend therefore to build a temple for the name of the Lord my God, as the Lord told my father David, when he said, your son, whom I will put on the throne in your place, will build a temple for my name. So give orders that cedars of Lebanon be cut for me. My men will work with yours, and I will pay you for your men whatever wages you set. You know that we have no one so skilled in felling timber as the Sidonians. And when Hiram heard Solomon's message, he was greatly pleased and said, praise be to the Lord today, for he has given David a wise son to rule over his great nation. So Hiram sent word to Solomon, I have received the message that you sent me, and I will do all that you want in providing the cedar and juniper logs. My men will haul them down from Lebanon to the Mediterranean Sea, and I will float them as rafts by sea to the place that you specify. There I will separate them, and you can take them away. And you are to grant my wish by providing food for my royal household. In this way, Hiram kept Solomon supplied with all the cedar and juniper logs he wanted, and Solomon gave Hiram 20,000 cores of wheat as food for his household, in addition to 20,000 baths of pressed olive oil. Solomon continued to do this for Hiram year after year, and the Lord gave Solomon wisdom, just as he had promised him. There were peaceful relations between Hiram and Solomon, and the two of them made a treaty. So, this is exactly what David did with Hiram, only Solomon doubles down on it and kind of expounds on it. And the reason why this particular treaty is so important is because of who it's with. So Hiram, king of Tyre, is the king of Tyre, and the king of Tyre and Tyre itself basically is in charge of what's called the Via Maris. It's called Via, Way, and Maris Sea, Way of the Sea. Okay, it's a road that basically goes along the coastline, and it's a trade route. Nearby, a little bit farther away, you have what's called the King's Highway. It's a much more dangerous route, but it's also a little shorter, if I remember correctly. And there's forwarding places in between the two routes. So, like, you have Way of the Sea, you have King's Highway, and then there's like a road there, road there, road there. Both of these roads and the forwarding points between them are extremely, extremely strategic. Actually, the castle of Megiddo, when we sit here and we talk about the Battle of Armageddon, the Hill of Megiddo, that's what Armageddon stands for. That actually is in that area. That's where it's at. It's extremely strategic as far as battle, as far as controlling trade routes and everything else. So when he is essentially making a deal with Hiram, king of Tyre, one that is incredibly solidified by a lot of money going both ways, one of them controls the one trade route, the other one controls the other trade route, and they're just raking in the money from hand over fist. That's one of the ways that Solomon gets so rich. The other way is that the Phoenicians, which is from Tyre, they're the best in the world at this point, as far as we know, at making boats and sailing. And essentially what happens is they make boats, and Solomon will use those boats to go trade with the East. And that opens up a whole new trade route that way. So this bedfellows kind of thing going on here is what is going to make Solomon the richest person that's ever lived. Tyre, and we've talked about this before, but just to kind of give an overview of where it's at. Tyre, essentially, there's two parts of Tyre. One was destroyed a long time before the other, but there's two parts of Tyre. You have the ground, the land portion of Tyre, and you have the island portion of Tyre. It was like a square island, and essentially it was a fortified city. It was incredibly fortified. The land portion of Tyre was destroyed a long time before the sea portion, but Alexander the Great took care of the sea portion. He actually was in that area conquering. He comes up across Tyre, and Tyre, and just like he always did, he basically says, look, give me homage, pay homage to me, and you're going to pay taxes to me. We're cool, I'll move on. You don't, I'm going to go there, I'm going to kill every living being there, we're going to pour salt over everything, nothing's going to grow there for 100 years. Make your choice. Basically, Tyre, because they were in the middle of the ocean, just kind of went, nana, nana, boo, boo, you can't get us. Essentially what they did. And Alexander the Great, as far as his biography tells us, essentially what he did was he kind of walked up and down the beach all night long, and he sat there and he thought to himself, and he's like, okay, so Greeks are horrible sailors. horrible sailors. Okay? We can't get there by boat. Okay? Especially against the Phoenicians. All right? That's not going to work. What do I have? I have 50,000 men at my disposal, and I have land where there's literally 1,000,000 rocks. What do I do? So that night, after thinking about it, he commanded all of his people to just start grabbing rocks and walking up to the water and throwing them in. And they did that for days. And essentially what they did was they created a causeway that you could actually see to this day. And they actually created a causeway from the land all the way to the city of Tyre. And they destroyed it. Now, the Bible sits there and talks about the judgment against Tyre and says that when you're gone, you will never be rebuilt again. That's one of the prophecies of the Bible that has actually come true, because you can go to Tyre to this day and you will see a few old fishermen just fishing off the square island. There is not a building one there. And you can see the causeway that Alexander the Great created. It's underwater now. You can kind of see the formation of it. You can't see it right on top. But just think about that for a second. You're Tyre, and you've been there for centuries. Nobody's been able to touch you. And all of a sudden, the guard sits there and goes, is it me or are they getting closer? Like, and they literally walk right up and just raise the place. So that's how Tyre ends. But that's what's going on at this point in time, is Solomon and Tyre have become bedfellows, and it's going to be a very long-lasting relationship. Okay, so now we've kind of talked about that. Now we're going to go back into Solomon messing up big time. So it says, King Solomon conscripted laborers from all Israel, 30,000 men. He sent them off to Lebanon in shifts of 10,000 a month, so that they spent 1 month in Lebanon and 2 months at home. So it says, Adoniram was in charge of the forced labor. Solomon had 70,000 carriers and 80,000 stonecutters in the hills, as well as 3,300 foremen, who supervised the project and directed the workers. And at the king's command, they removed from the quarry large blocks of high-grade stone to provide a foundation of dressed stone for the temple. The craftsmen of Solomon and Hiram and workers from Byblos cut and prepared the timber and the stone for the building of the temple. Okay, so now here's the thing, and this is where a lot of people are going to get hung up on wording. But this is what's actually going on here. Okay, so King Solomon is actually transcribing labor. Okay, it's essentially the draft. And what he's doing is he's saying, look, I have, well, actually 2 huge projects that he's going to do, but I have this huge project that's going to be this national treasure. And I need volunteers, but I'm not really willing to accept that and everything. So here's how this is going to work. You're going to work for me for a month, and then you can go home and you can work for yourself for 2 months. And then you're going to come back and you're going to work for me for another month. And you're going to go back home for 2 months. And they're going to rotate this 10,000 people at a time. Okay? That's how it starts. Now, if we go back to the Deuteronomy, I don't know if I put that in your guys' notes or not. But when we go back to the Old Testament, to the Torah, one of the things that the king is not supposed to do, actually nobody is supposed to do, okay, is you are not supposed to enslave an Israelite. That's not just the king, that's anybody. Another Israelite is never supposed to enslave another Israelite, period. He's calling it transcripted labor. What is it really? It's slavery. You have to work for me or else you're punished. Okay? It's the exact same thing as the draft. I understand the draft, or the whole purpose behind it and everything, but at the end of the day, you're telling somebody you don't have your own life anymore. You're living for us. Whether you live or die, that's your problem. Go fight the war and everything, and when you come back, we'll be cool. Okay? It was a forced decision. All right? Essentially, it was slavery. All right? You get paid what we tell you to get paid. You're going to do what we tell you you're going to do, and if you don't, you go to prison. So that's what it was. And like I said, I understand the need for it in a wartime and all that stuff, especially in such a war like that. But at the same time, this isn't wartime. This is him building something. And so he's enslaving the Israelites when he does this. Okay? And that's something that the Bible is very, very strict upon, that you are not allowed to do. Okay? So he does this. And the reason why he's getting away with it at first is because he's doing it in rotations. Okay, it's not like I'm going to be gone for years. I'm going to be gone for a month, then I'll be back for 2 months, then I got to go for a month. It's kind of like this obligation kind of thing, but it's not their choice. When all of this is over with, when we finally get to the end of Solomon's reign and Rehoboam comes up, this has gotten a lot worse. Okay, now he's used it for the temple, then he uses it for his palace, which takes 20 years. Okay, this is some people's entire work lifetimes. And when he dies and Rehoboam takes the kingship, the people come up to him and say, look, you're the king now, that's cool. We'll all be your loyal subjects and we'll go hooray for you. That's great, but we want 2 concessions. Number 1, stop with the transcripted labor. Enough. Okay? Let us live our own lives. Let us work for our own wages. Let us do what we want to do with our own lives. And the second is lower the taxes, because Solomon was taxing these people essentially between Solomon's taxes, between the priesthood taxes, and between the temple taxes. They were getting taxed about 30 to 40%. Didn't matter what income bracket you had, that's what you did. So they said, knock off with the transcripted labor and lower the taxes. And ease our yoke, and you're our guy. To which he basically said, yeah, right, you wish. Actually, he said a lot worse than that, but I won't say that. But he basically tells them no. And that's what starts the civil war, and that's what divides the kingdoms. So right here, it's going to go over pretty briefly and everything about the temple. It says, in the 480th year after the Israelites came out of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, the 2nd month he began to build the temple of the Lord. Okay, so there's a couple things about this that we need to understand about that one paragraph. In the 480th year after the Israelites came out of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel. This is pretty much the date that we get everything else from, because this was the first date that was actively solidified by archaeological science. Okay, up until this point, all the dates that you've heard were dates that were in the Bible. But when we get to this date right here, this is like, people will argue to this day, when was the Exodus? Some people will say, me personally, I believe the Bible is internally consistent. I think it was in the 1400s. Some people will say there's a lot of evidence and everything to say it happened in the 1200s. So, which one is it? This right here, this date right here shows us this is the rock solid date. The other thing that I want to make mention to, and this really comes down to more about the way a Hebrew writes. And I don't want to sit there and say and everything, because I know people may get the wrong idea when I say this. You have to understand how they write as opposed to how we write. Okay? There is, like, if you look in the Bible, okay, and you sit there and you see the kingships, okay, you're going to see Saul reign for 40 years. You're going to see Solomon, or you're going to see David reign for 40 years. You're going to see Solomon reign for 40 years. Now, what are the chances of that? What are the chances the 3 kings back to back to back are all going to reign 40 years and that's it? Okay, exactly the same time frame. Well, the thing you have to understand is that's the way we write. That's not the way a Hebrew writes. 40 years can also mean a generation. So that's where I wouldn't get hung up on timelines and all this stuff. All of this stuff absolutely happened, especially now. We have so much archaeological evidence of it, it's not even funny. People used to think for years that David was essentially the same as, what's-his-face from Camelot? King Arthur, okay? That's what they thought. They thought he was a mystical figure and everything in history, until we found the Tel Dan Stela, which actually talked about the House of David. So there's so much archaeological evidence that all this stuff took place nowadays, it's not even funny. But to sit there and worry about the dates, I wouldn't worry about the dates so much. Because again, the way Hebrews work is they work in times, they work in generations, they work in literal years. So it's kind of hard to pick which one's which. But this right here is 480 years. Now, that could be a literal 480 years, and I'm perfectly fine with that. Or it could also mean the 12 tribes of Israel versus the time that it took and everything since they've been out of Egypt. Which essentially is what it's kind of telling you here. If that's the case, when it sits there and it tells this, in the 480th year out of the Israelites came out of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, which is in the spring, the 2nd month he began to build the temple of the Lord. So you can look at that as a factual statement, or you can look at that as kind of ironic and sit there and understand that what that could be telling you from God's point of view is 480th years after the Israelites came from out of a ruler, from out of Pharaoh, and now you're in your own land building your own temple under another Pharaoh. He's doing the exact same thing to you the Pharaoh did. He's making you work. He's constricting your labor. He's paying you whatever he feels he needs to pay you, and he's making you do exactly what he wants you to do. So this could be a declaration of just factual statement, or it could be a declaration of, well, look what happened. Now, the reason why I kind of lean towards the latter is because if you guys recall, when we studied 1 Samuel, Samuel tells the people, we want a king, we want a king, we want a king. And Samuel sits there and says to them, do you have any idea what a king's going to do? A king is going to put himself higher than you. A king is going to make your sons and daughters work for him. A king is going to make it to where you are lower, he is higher, you will be subject to him, and you will have no control over your own lives. When God sits there and tells Solomon, give him a king, he's not sitting there going, oh yeah, no, I knew this day was coming, sure, I got that guy over there, he's already in reserve, go ahead and give him a king. When the Bible says, God says, give him a king, he's literally saying it with contempt. He's like, they want a king? Fine. Give him a king. You know? It's kind of like the kid that's smoking a cigarette. Oh, you want to smoke? I got 5 packs right here. Let's have a party. Yeah, I don't think you understand what you're asking for. Let's find out. So that's what's going on. They wanted a king. They got a king. What did they get? They got Saul, who couldn't even fight the battles. And that's what they said. We want somebody who's going to fight our battles for us. And then what happens when the Philistines come? Saul's sitting there going, anybody want to do this? I'll put my daughter up. Never have to pay taxes for your entire life. Anybody? No takers? Okay, didn't get that. Then you got David. David was a great king, a warrior king, loved his people and loved God. But man, did he commit some atrocities. And now you got Solomon, who's basically taking the people and acting like he's the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, and they're just going to do whatever he tells them to do. So they got their king. So it says here, it says, the temple the king Solomon built for the Lord was 60 cubits long, 20 wide, and 30 high. The portico at the front of the main hall of the temple extended the width of the temple, that is 20 cubits, and projected 10 cubits from the front of the temple. He made narrow windows high up in the temple walls, and against the walls of the main hall and the inner sanctuary he built a structure around the building in which there were side rooms. The lowest floor was 5 cubits wide, the middle floor 6 cubits, and the third floor 7. He made offset ledges around the outside of the temple so that nothing would be inserted into the temple walls. In the temple, in building the temple, only blocks dressed at the quarry were used, and no hammer, chisel, or any other tool was heard at the temple site while it was being built. The entrance to the lowest floor was on the south side of the temple. The stairway led to the middle level from there to the third, and he built the temple and completed it, roofing it with beams and cedar planks. He built the side rooms along all along the temple, and the height of each was 5 cubits, and they were attached to the temple by beams of cedar. And the word of the Lord came to Solomon, as for this temple you are building, now this is one of those things, again, whenever God talks like this, is it a conditional covenant or is it an unconditional covenant? This is a conditional covenant. It says, as for this temple you are building, if you follow my decrees, observe my laws, and keep all my commandments, and obey them, I will fulfill through you the promise that I gave to David your father. And I will live among the Israelites and will not abandon my people Israel. So Solomon built the temple and completed it, and he lined its interior walls with cedar boards, paneling them from the floor to the temple of the ceiling, and covered the floor of the temple with planks of juniper. He partitioned off 20 bits at the rear of the temple with cedar boards from the floor of the ceiling to form within the temple and inner sanctuary the most holy place. The main hall in front of this room was 40 cubits long. In the inside was a temple with cedar, carved with gourds and open flowers. Everything was cedar, and no stone was to be seen. He prepared the inner sanctuary with the temple to set the ark of the covenant of the Lord there. The inner sanctuary was 20 cubits long, 20 wide, and 20 high. He overlaid the inside with pure gold, and he also overlaid the altar of cedar. Solomon covered the inside of the temple with pure gold, and he extended gold chains from across the front of the inner sanctuary, which is overlaid with gold. So he overlaid the whole interior with gold. He also overlaid the altar that belonged to the inner sanctuary. Okay, so he builds a building of stone. Then he overlays every bit of that stone with cedar and precious woods. And then after that, he overlays all that with gold. Now, I know all those cubits and everything sound real big, but the reality is that it was not. It was not a big building, okay? Cubit is essentially this, okay? That's a cubit. So, it was not a very big building. So, but it's like one teacher that I've heard say so many times, it was kind of like a Fabergé egg. It was small, but it was absolutely gorgeous. Now, we've talked about this before. I've kind of given you this illustration before, but think about this for a minute. This is a building. There's no electricity, okay? It's stone, then wood, then gold. Everything is overlaid with gold. There's no light whatsoever, okay? There's little slit windows in it that's higher up, and that feeds it a little bit of like actual daylight, but other than that, there's no light, okay? At nighttime, you can't see in front of your face. But then you have the menorah. And you have the menorah with the candles on it. And think about that for a second. Walking into a completely and totally dark area with nothing but candlelight. But that candlelight bounces off pure gold everywhere that the light touches. And you just see the place glow. That's how it looked. It was absolutely amazing. So, this is how the temple was built. It says, for the inner sanctuary, he made a pair of cherubim out of live wood or olive wood, each 10 cubits high. One wing of the first cherub was 5 cubits long, and the other wing 5 cubits, 10 cubits from wingtip to wingtip. The second cherubim also 10 cubits. Essentially what he did and again he overlaid them with gold. Essentially what he did was he put 2 huge cherubim basically up. That was where the Ark of the Covenant and the poles were going to lay. There were 2 cherubim whose wings were spread out. One wing was touching the one side of the wall. The other wing was touching the other wing of the cherubim. And these 2 were basically watching over the Ark of the Covenant. So that's what this is talking about. And he overlaid the cherubim with gold. It says, verse 29, on the walls around the temple in both the inner and outer rooms, he carved the cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers. He also covered the floors of both the inner and outer rooms of the temple with gold. For the entrance to the inner sanctuary, he made doors out of olive wood that were 1/5 of the width of the sanctuary, and on the 2 olive wood doors he carved cherubim, palm trees, open flowers, and overlaid the cherubim and palm trees with hammered gold. In the same way, for the entrance of the main hall, he made door frames out of olive wood, 1/4 of the width of the hall. Just goes on and on again. The foundation of the temple of the Lord was laid in the 4th year in the month of Ziv. In the 11th year, in the month of Bul, the 8th month, the temple was finished in all its details according to its specifications, and he had spent 7 years building it. So 7 years it took him. Now, mind you, he was not the guy that designed this. That was his dad. This was just getting everything ready and putting stone on top of stone. That's what it was. All of the Psalms and everything, we know that David wrote, half of them essentially, 73 out of 150 Psalms. He was the one who trained the priest. He did all that stuff. All Solomon needed to do was build the building. And that's what he did. And it took him 7 years to get everything in there, everything perfect, everything hammered out, the gold overlaid, everything. And it took him 7 years to do that. It will take him 13 years to do his palace. So, it says, chapter 7, it took Solomon 13 years, however. Now notice how it says, however. Why does it say however? Because it's basically saying his palace was more important to him than the temple of God. That's what it's saying. So, it took Solomon 13 years, however, to complete the construction of his palace. He built the palace of the forest of Lebanon, 100 cubits long, 50 wide, 30 high, with 4 rows of cedar columns. We're not going to go through all of this. Basically, it was a really nice palace. So, the temple furnishings, it says, King Solomon sent to Tyre and bought Horam brought Horam, whose mother was a widow from the tribe of Naphtali, and whose father was from Tyre and a skilled craftsman in bronze. Horam was filled with wisdom, with understanding, and with knowledge to do all kinds of bronze work. He came to King Solomon and did all the work as assigned to him. He cast 2 bronze pillars, each 80 cubits high, 12 cubits in circumference. He also made 2 capitals of cast bronze to set on the tops of the pillars. Each capital was 5 cubits high. Let's see here, network of chains, yada, yada. Okay, so let's go down to verse 23, because this is something that I want to talk to you guys about. So it says, he made the sea of cast metal, circular in shape, measuring 10 cubits from rim to rim and 5 cubits high. It took a line of 30 cubits to measure around it. Below the rim, gourds encircled it 10 to a cubit. The gourds were cast in 2 rows with 1 piece of the sea. The sea stood on 12 bulls, 3 facing north, 3 west, 3 south, and 3 east. The sea that rested on top of them, and their hindquarters were towards the center. It was a handbreadth of thickness, and its rim was like the rim of a cup, like a lily blossom, and it held 2,000 baths. So what is this thing? Okay, do you guys remember in the book of Revelation where it sits there and says, it basically after everything happens, and then John puts in there was no sea? Okay, now that could mean, and I'm not going to insist one way or the other, that could mean there was no sea. There was no body of water there. Okay, that's what it could mean. But it could also mean there was no sea. And the reason why that's a good possibility is because of what a sea is. So a sea, I wish we had a picture of it here. You guys could probably put it up on your phone. Essentially what it is that is this huge object that would have the 12 bulls facing all different directions, 3 in each direction. And in the middle of the bulls is this gigantic bowl. When it sits there and it says, how many baths? 2,000. Okay, 2,000 baths. A bath is a unit of measurement in water for them. This thing carried a ton of clean water. And what would they do with it is essentially before the priest would enter the temple, they would go to the sea. And it would have almost like a spigot of some kind, and they would get below it, and what they would do, the 12 bulls would essentially be where you could stand, and essentially they would turn on the water, the clean water would come down, and they would be able to clean themselves before they enter the temple. Okay, it was a ritualistic cleansing. So when John sits there and says there was no sea, what he could be indicating is that when we get to that point, there is no ritualistic cleansing that we need to have. We already have the cleansing. Okay, there was no point of it. If you remember, it sits there and says that he sees a sea of glass, or that looks like glass. Now, was he actually seeing a sea of glass that is actually made out of crystal? Well, quite possibly. I'm sure this place is going to be absolutely amazing to look at. But it could also be a sea that was so calm that it looked like glass. That it was just this beautiful, shiny stillness. That's what he saw. So, again, we don't know. This is one of those things that theologians have debated one way or the other and everything for as long as the Bible's been out. But essentially, that's what a sea is. And I wanted to bring that to your guys' attention. Let me see. No. How would I know I was going to do that? I just want to... Okay. So, this probably isn't exactly what it looked like. I don't know if it'll do it or not. But, because it's looks like an AI-generated image. But essentially, that's what it was. Okay, actually, now that I think about it, hold on. Oh, there it is right there. Perfect. So this is kind of a blurry picture, but if you guys can see it, he also talks about these. These are the hand carts and everything that were made that could fill up with water or bring the water to the sea. But you see that priest down there, how he's using the sea So I said, if you guys want to look at it, I can pass my phone around and everything, but it'll probably go dark after a while. But essentially what it is it's this bunch of bowls and everything with a bowl on top of it, and there's water coming down, and the priest will use that as a ritualistic cleansing, almost like a shower. And that way it's clean water, and it literally contains thousands of gallons of clean water.
My Bible says 10,000.
There you go. So, yeah, 10,000 gallons of clean water. So if anybody ever sits there and says that God is against collecting rainwater, show them that. So, essentially, that's what that is. Then it goes on to sitting here describing what the stands were. The stands were stuff that would kind of look like a mini C without the bulls, but wheels. And that is what they could put underneath it. They could draw water from it, or they could use that to bring water to it. Let's see here. 10,000 basins. Okay, so if we just go to, I guess we'll start in verse 38. It says, he made 10 bronze basins, each holding 40 baths, measuring 4 cubits across, 1 basin to go on each of the 10 stands. He placed 5 of the stands on the south side of the temple and 5 on the north. He placed the sea on the south side and the southeast corner of the temple. He also made the pots and the shovels and the sprinkling bowls. So Hiram finished all the work he had undertaken for King Solomon in the temple of the Lord, the 2 pillars, the 2 bowl-shaped capitals on the top of the pillars, the 2 sets of network decorating, the 2 bowl-shaped capitals on the top of the pillars, the 400 pomegranates for the 2 sets of networks, 2 rows of pomegranates for each network decorating the bowl-shaped capitals on the top of the pillars, the 10 stands with their 10 basins, the sea and the 12 bowls under it, the pots, the shovels, and the sprinkling bowls. And man, I hope this dude got a deposit. From one contractor for another, man, that's a job, let me tell you. It says, all these objects that Hiram made from King Solomon for the temple of the Lord were of burnished bronze. The king had them cast in clay molds in the plain of the Jordan between Succoth and Zarethan. And Solomon left all these things unweighed, because there were so many, the weight of the bronze was not determined. Solomon also made all the furnishings that were in the Lord's temple, the golden altar, the golden table on which the bread of the presence, the lampstands of the pure gold, 5 on the right, 5 on the left in the front of the inner sanctuary, the gold floral work and the lamps and the tongs, the pure gold basins, wick trimmers, sprinkling bowls, dishes, and censers, the gold sockets for the doors of the innermost rooms, the most holy place, and also for the doors of the main hall of the temple. And when all the work King Solomon had done for the temple of the Lord was finished, he brought in the things that his father David had dedicated, the silver and the gold and the furnishings, and he placed them in the treasuries of the Lord's temple. So, now the temple is completed, okay? It's all done. Now, we got to put the icing on the cake, and we got to bring the Ark of the Covenant. So it says, then King Solomon summoned into his presence at Jerusalem the elders of Israel and all the heads of the tribes of the chiefs of the Israelite families to bring up the Ark of the Covenant, the Lord's covenant from Zion, the city of David. All of the Israelites came together to King Solomon at the time of the festival in the month of Aphanim, the 7th month. When all the elders of Israel had arrived, the priest took up the ark, and they brought up the ark of the Lord and a tent of meeting and all the sacred furnishings in it. And the priests and the Levites carried them up, and King Solomon and the entire assembly of Israel had gathered about him, were before the ark sacrificing so many sheep and cattle that they could not be recorded or counted. The priest then brought the ark of the Lord's covenant to its place in the inner sanctuary of the temple, the most holy place, and put it beneath the wings of the cherubim. That's the cherubim we were talking about where the wings touch. The cherubim spread their wings over the place of the ark and overshadowed the ark and its carrying poles. These poles were so long that their ends could be seen from the holy place in front of the inner sanctuary, but not from the outside of the holy place, and they are still there today. Now, here's a key verse and everything. This is one of those, you can take a test and everything, and you're going to sound really smart. It says right there in verse 9, there was nothing in the ark except the 2 stone tablets that Moses had placed in it at Horeb, where the Lord had made a covenant with the Israelites after they came out of Egypt. So what's missing? The manna in the gold jar and Aaron's staff that had blossomed. Right. So, where to go? So, most likely, and we talked about this when we read the story, when the Philistines captured the ark, and they were basically given, we don't know exactly, but they were even given the first inclination of bubonic plague, or they were given fatal hemorrhoids. Personally, I like the latter. But they were given some kind of fatal swelling that basically affected anybody that was around the ark. Now, what most likely happened is that they got a hold of the ark and they opened it up. And the whole thing from Indiana Jones did not occur. And they opened it up and they looked inside of it and they're like, this is it. This is the Ark of the Covenant. This is the Ark of God. There's a jar with some weird cracker in it. Throw away the cracker, keep the jar. There's a stick with a flower on it. Who cares about that? Throw it away. Other than that, there's only just 2 really big heavy stones that I don't really want to pick up. Whatever, shut the lid. So that's probably what happened to it. We don't know. But somewhere along the line, the Ark of the Covenant essentially was raided. Okay? Now, here's the main thing that we have to remember about this, that a lot of people won't put this in their minds when they're thinking of this. Okay? The Ark of the Covenant, and it doesn't say this specifically, but I really don't know where else it could have gone. The Ark of the Covenant has always been the place where the pillar of cloud and fire rests. So unless the pillar of cloud and fire was not resting on the Ark of the Covenant and it was resting over the tabernacle, which is possible because there were times that the pillar of cloud and fire was high up above the tabernacle and it was used as kind of like a guiding beacon. This is where home is. But it was either over the tabernacle or it was over the Ark of the Covenant when they took it. And if that's the case, I got to be honest with you, kudos to those guys because they got some stones. I don't know that I would have done that. Dude, this cloud's looking at me funny. I don't know if I want to pick this thing up and take it to camp. But at the end of the day, I don't know where the Ark of the Covenant or where the pillar of cloud and fire was, if it was there or whatever. But what we do know is that while it was there was a statue of Dagon that it completely, totally trashed. Like, one day it fell over, the next day it fell over, and the head fell off and everything. I mean, God was just playing with this thing. So, but essentially he did. He gave them terminal hemorrhoids. That's all we know, really, is that they had some kind of swelling, but they kept saying, well, let's pass it off to the next guys. We don't want this thing no more. Let's give it to those guys over there down the road. So they'd give it to those guys, they'd get them. Now let's give it to those guys over there. Finally, they all get together and say, let's just give it back to the Israelites. They can get them. So that's how the Ark of the Covenant actually comes back into possession. Nobody came and got it. They gave it back because they were tired of it. But essentially, somewhere in between point A and point B, stuff gets raided out of the Ark of the Covenant.
How did they do without getting killed instantly?
Huh?
Like we talked about the Ark, you automatically just died.
So that's a good question, and I have probably a relatively insightful answer to it, but it's one of those things that who knows. So I would guess that the reason why they weren't completely and totally obliterated is because they didn't know any better. What I mean by that is every Jew knew what the Ark of the Covenant was and what it wasn't and how exactly you're supposed to do what you're supposed to be doing. Remember, David eventually put it on a cart. And then he found out this is not how you're supposed to carry the Ark of the Covenant. Okay, this is a bad idea. Go get the priest, go get the poles. We need to do this the right way. But these guys don't know any better. Now, could God have obliterated anybody that touched it? Of course he could have. But God was also proving a point. God wanted to go into that camp. Okay, if God didn't want to go in that camp, the Ark of the Covenant never would have been captured. God wanted to go into that camp because he wanted to show them. Remember, we look at these stories and everything as you have the Israelites and then everybody else is bad guys. Remember, God's will is that everybody be saved. So he shows his power to anybody who's looking. And if he has an opportunity to show some people that flat out spit on his name and everything, that, hey, guess what? I am God and I am the only God and I'm the one you should be worshiping, he'll do it. So that's what I would imagine happened. But again, Brian wasn't there. So, let's see here. Where were we? Okay, the priest brought the ark up. Was I on verse 3? Or did I get past that? 10? 12, okay. No, I didn't get to 12. That's the flow. Yeah, hold on. 10, okay. All right. So when the priest withdrew from the holy place, the cloud, there it is right there, the cloud. So the cloud, the pillar of cloud and fire is over the Ark of the Covenant. When the priest withdrew from the holy place, the cloud filled the temple of the Lord. How do we know, and we argued this and everything, or we talked about how this argument has kind of gone over, throughout scholars and everything, that when that when some people believe that when Joshua crossed over the River Jordan to get to the other side, all of a sudden the Ark of the Covenant or the pillar of cloud and fire isn't there anymore. Okay? Because now it's just called the glory of the Lord. That the pillar of cloud and fire left them. And it's like, no, a different person is writing the book. Okay? So how do we know that the pillar of cloud and fire? Well, look what's written there. It doesn't say a cloud. It says the cloud. The cloud that has been there the entire time filled the temple of the Lord, and the priests could not perform their services because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled his temple. And then Solomon said, the Lord has said that he would dwell in a dark cloud, and I have indeed built a magnificent temple for you, a place for you to dwell forever. And while the whole assembly of Israel was standing there, the king turned around and blessed them, and he said, praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who with his own hand has fulfilled what he promised with his own mouth to my father David. For he said, since the day I brought my people Israel out of Egypt, I have not chosen a city in any tribe of Israel to have a temple built so that my name might be there, but I have chosen David to rule my people Israel. My father David had it in his heart to build a temple for the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. But the Lord said to my father David, you did well to have it in your heart to build a temple for my name. Nevertheless, you are not the one to build the temple, but your son, your own flesh and blood. He is the one who will build the temple for my name. Now, can anybody see what's actually happening here in the mind of Solomon? Okay, and this isn't a really knock on Solomon, because I completely understand why he would think this, because we know the end of the story and he doesn't. He thinks he's talking about him. He's not talking about him. When God sits there and says, one of your own flesh and blood will build a temple for my name, he's talking about Christ. Okay? That's the temple he was talking about. So, when Jesus Christ died, we essentially all became temples of the Lord. Our bodies are the temple for the Holy Spirit. So, again, it's one of those situations where it kind of means two things at once. But Solomon doesn't see it like that. This is like the second or third time he's mentioned it, that I'm the one that was chosen and everything to build the temple. I'm the son of David. He doesn't understand that the actual son of David is going to be centuries later. So, but like I said, you can't really fault him for that. He doesn't know the future. So, let's see here. 20. The Lord has kept the promise he made. I have succeeded David my father, and I now sit on the throne of Israel just as the Lord promised. And I have built a temple for the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. I have provided a place there for the ark, in which is the covenant of the Lord that he made with our ancestors when he brought them out of Egypt. And I just kind of look at that and I'm going, yep, when he brought them out of Egypt, away from somebody that enslaved them and made them do a bunch of work that they didn't want to do and everything else. And, well, here we are again. So, okay, so Solomon's prayer of dedication. Now, this much I will give the guy and everything. This is an amazing prayer. This is probably one of the best prayers in the entire Bible, in all honesty, other than anything that you would see from Jesus. Okay, because this is a genuinely honest and actually very insightful prayer. Okay, so he says, when Solomon stood before the altar of the Lord in front of the whole assembly of Israel, spread out his hands towards the heaven and said, the Lord, the God of Israel, there is no God like you in heaven above or on earth below. You who keep your covenant of love with your servants who continue wholeheartedly in your way, you have kept your promise to your servant David my father. With your mouth you have promised, with your hand you have fulfilled it, as it is today. Now, Lord, the God of Israel, keep for your servant David my father the promises that you made to him when you said, you shall never fail to have a successor to sit before me on the throne of Israel, if only your descendants are careful in all they do to walk before me faithfully as you have done. And now, God of Israel, let your word that you promised your servant David, my father, come true. But will God really dwell on earth? The heavens, even the highest heaven, cannot contain you. How much less this temple that I have built? Yet give attention to your servant's prayer and his plea for mercy. Lord my God, hear the cry and the prayer that your servant is praying in your presence this day. May your eyes be open towards this temple night and day, this place of what you said, my name shall be there, so that you will hear the prayer of your servant, or your servant prays towards this place. Hear the supplication of your servant and of your people Israel when they pray towards this place. Hear from heaven your dwelling place, and when you hear, forgive. Now he's not done yet, but that's a really insightful way of looking at that. He basically tells God, I know this temple is not where you're really going to live. I understand what it means and everything when you say that you will dwell here with us forever. I understand that nothing in this universe can possibly ever contain you. But always keep us in your eyesight, and when people come to this temple and they pray to you, he doesn't say, hear their prayers. He instinctively knows that if they're coming to this temple and they're praying, they're begging for forgiveness. And he tells them, or he tells God, when you hear these prayers that are coming from this temple, forgive. So he says, when anyone wrongs their neighbor and is required to take an oath, and they come and swear the oath before the altar in this temple, then hear from heaven and act. Judge between your servants, condemning the guilty by bringing down on their heads what they have done, and vindicating the innocent by treating them in accordance with their innocence. When your people Israel have been defeated by an enemy because they have sinned against you, and when they turn back to you and give praise to your name, praying and making supplication to you in this temple, then hear from heaven and forgive the sin of your people Israel and bring them back to the land you gave their ancestors. Does that happen? Yeah, that happens. When the heavens are shut up and there is no rain because your people have sinned against you, and when they pray towards this place and give praise to your name and turn from their sin because you have afflicted them, then hear from heaven and forgive the sin of your servants, your people Israel. Teach them the right way to live and send rain on the land you gave your people for an inheritance. And when famine or plague comes to the land, or blight or mildew, locusts or grasshoppers, or when an enemy besieges them in any of their cities, whatever disaster or disease may come, and when a prayer or plea is made by anyone among your people Israel, being aware of the afflictions of their own hearts, and spreading out their hands towards this temple, then hear from heaven your dwelling place. Forgive and act. Deal with everyone according to all they do, since you know their hearts, for you alone know every human heart. And what do I always teach in everything? I always teach, I don't care how long you've been married to somebody, I don't care how close you are to somebody, no one knows your true heart except for God. So it says, they will fear you all the time they have lived in the land you gave our ancestors. As for our foreigner who does not belong to your people Israel, but has come from a distant land because of your name, for they will hear of your great name and your mighty hand and your outstretched arm when they come and pray towards this temple, then hear from heaven your dwelling place. Do whatever the foreigner asked of you, so that all the peoples on earth may know your name and fear you, as do your own people Israel, and may know that this house that I have built bears your name. When your people go to war against their enemies, whenever you send them, and when they pray to the Lord towards the city you have chosen and the temple I have built for your name, then hear from heaven their prayer and their plea, and uphold their cause. And when they sin against you, for there is no one who does not sin, and you become angry with them, and give them over to their enemies, who take them captive to their own lands, far away or near. And if they have a change of heart in the land, where they plead with you in the land of their captors, and say, we have sinned, we have done wrong, we have acted wickedly, and if they turn back to you with all their heart and soul in the land of their enemies, who took them captive, and pray to you toward the land you gave their ancestors, towards the city that you have chosen, and the temple that I have built for your name, then from heaven, your dwelling place, hear their prayer and their plea, and uphold their cause. And forgive your people who have sinned against you, forgive all of the offenses that they have committed against you, and cause their captors to show them mercy. For they are your people and your inheritance, whom you brought out of Egypt, and out of that iron-smelting furnace. And may your eyes be open to your servant's plea, and to the plea of your people Israel, and may you listen to them whenever they cry out for you. For you singled them out from all the nations of the world to be your own inheritance, just as you declared through your servant Moses when you, sovereign Lord, brought our ancestors out of Egypt. And when Solomon had finished all these prayers and supplications to the Lord, he rose from before the altar of the Lord, where he had been kneeling with his hands spread out towards the heaven. And he stood and blessed the whole assembly of Israel in a loud voice, saying, Praise be to the Lord, who has given rest to his people Israel, just as he promised. And not one word has failed of all the good promises he gave through his servant Moses. May the Lord our God be with us as he was with our ancestors, and may he never leave us or forsake us. And may he turn our hearts to him, to walk in obedience to him, and keep the commands, decrees, and the laws he gave our ancestors. And may these words of mine, which I have prayed before the Lord, be near to the Lord our God day and night, that he may uphold the cause of his servant and the cause of his people Israel according to each day's need, so that all the peoples of the earth may know that the Lord is God, and that there is no other. And may your hearts be fully committed to the Lord our God, to live by his decrees and obey his commands, as at this time. So he basically goes over in a myriad of situations that he knows is going to happen, because he knows his people just as well as, well, not as well as God, but he knows his people. And pretty much everything in here that he says and he prays for happens. They will turn their backs on God completely and totally. The northern kingdom will be taken by the Assyrians. All the kingdoms will be taken by the Babylonians. They will be in captivity for 7 years. Fast forward until a couple hundred years later, and Israel's gone. It's basically a swampland, okay? Numerous people, numerous different kingdoms and everything have taken it over, have completely and totally wiped it of its heritage entirely, until you get all the way down to, what was it, May of 1948, I think it was, and all of a sudden, the Israelites come back. And in one day, they create the nation of Israel. And right after that, they're immediately attacked, and they wipe the floor. Wipe the floor with the people attacking them. So, this is a God thing. Okay? Everything that he just prayed about is going to take place. And every single time, God does exactly what he asks them to do. When they turn their hearts to you, when they turn around, forgive them, because they're going to go astray. Notice he never talks about God going astray. He sits there and he talks about God, as far, what does he say exactly? I don't want to get it wrong. When he sits there and he talks about God abandoning. Yeah. So he does. He abandons the temple. That takes place, if you want to read about it, and we've talked about it a great many times, that actually takes place in the book of Ezekiel. Ezekiel is given 13 visions, if I'm not mistaken. One of the visions is when he takes Ezekiel to the temple, and he sees all of these people, all the priests and everything, behind these hidden walls, worshiping these lizards and spiders and all sorts of things. They're worshiping everything other than God, and they're doing it in the temple. Okay? And essentially what winds up happening is the temple of God, or the Ark of the Covenant of God, the pillar of cloud and fire is there, and then cherubim, these huge, gigantic angels, come and they go on the threshold. They don't go inside the temple. They go on the threshold of the Temple Mount. And the pillar of cloud and fire raises up, and this is actually a really good chapter, a really good book and everything to go to when you read that in Ezekiel, because here we just read about how everything is built. It gives you the exact same description in the book of Ezekiel. Talks about how the pillar of cloud and fire raises up from the Ark of the Covenant, goes over to one of the beams, then eventually moves from one of the beams over to the actual doorway of the temple, then goes onto the Temple Mount, goes down the stairs, goes up the east, I think it's the east gate, goes up the Mount of Olives and stops there for a second, almost to turn around and say goodbye one last time, goes down the Mount of Olives, and you never see the pillar of cloud and fire again. About 400 years later, Jesus Christ takes that exact same route on a donkey up the Mount of Olives, down the Mount of Olives, goes right into the same gate, goes right up to the temple and wrecks the place. Exact same trajectory. So God does abandon it. God is just like, look, this is not what this place is for. We're done. I'm tired of this. Okay? Eventually, after Jesus Christ is crucified, he's crucified in AD 32 roundabouts. About 40 years later, one generation, Okay, remember, if you remember the words of Jesus when he sits there and he talks about the generations and everything, that all this will happen in this generation. One generation's time from the time that he is crucified and rose again and ascends into heaven, the temple, the last temple, is destroyed. It's destroyed by a firefight that was caused by the Romans and by the rebels and everything that were trying to get away from Roman rule. There was an actual firefight, like literal fire arrows were flying. Some tapestries of the temple caught on fire, and because that temple was essentially made mostly of limestone, which is a high concentration of water, it exploded. When he sits there and he says, no stone will be left upon another, he meant it. It literally was like a bomb went off. Okay, now you can go to Israel to this day and you can actually see the rubble of that temple. It's still there. They mourn over it. But Josephus actually writes about how that the explosions were so loud that you could hear 30 miles away and everything in the city of Jericho the explosions of the temple. And it was because that water content in that limestone basically reached the boiling point and it just went boom. So that's what happens to the last temple. So God will eventually abandon all of that.
When it exploded, was the ark in it?
No, the Ark of the Covenant. So the Ark of the Covenant, and again, we've talked about this before, but I know I remember these boring historical facts. So the Ark of the Covenant, essentially, after the Babylonian captivity, the Babylonians come, they conquer the northern kingdom, which essentially is Assyria at that point. They conquer the southern kingdom, which is Judah. They go, and they're there for 70 years. Okay? Why 70 years? Because of one law that they broke. Okay? We know this from biblical text. One law that they broke. God told them that every 7 years you're supposed to allow the land to grow fallow. Okay? After so long, they stopped doing that. For every year that they did not do that, they would spend 1 year in Babylon. They stopped doing it for 490 years. If you backtrack that time from the time that was told all the way to the time when it actually started in the days of Samson, when Samson was a judge. That's at that time that law began to be broke, and it was never followed again. And for 490 years, they didn't follow it until God said, guess what? Time's up. Time to pay the piper. So Babylon captures everything. Now, Babylon took immaculate records. We know exactly what was taken because it's in the Bible. And we know exactly what was brought back when Cyrus the Great becomes king over Persia. He allows them, not just the Jews. In the Bible, it just talks about the Jews. I can actually bring in, it's the ancient text of Near East, the Near East text, something like that. But it's basically a book filled with ancient texts from the Near East. And one of the texts that we have is actually a tablet basically from Cyrus the Great talking about, we actually have the literal words of it, talking about how he doesn't just do that with the Jews, he does that with everybody that Babylon has conquered. He says, go home, rebuild your temples, rebuild your cities, you can pay tax to me, and you can ask your God to ask my gods for grace. Okay, that's the way it worked. You go talk to your God about talking to my God, and my God will treat me well. Okay? So, that's the way it worked. Well, we have in the Bible what is brought back, and we have in the Bible what is taken. Okay? The Ark of the Covenant is not taken. The Ark of the Covenant is not brought back. So, I mean, these lists literally consist of spoons. Okay? Spoons, bowls, all this kind of stuff. But the Ark of the Covenant is conspicuously absent. Okay? Now, there's a few different theories. One, Babylon did take it, just didn't mention it. And they melted it down. Okay? The second one is that Jeremiah hid it. And when Jeremiah hid it, he hid it in the Temple Mount. I understand that geopolitical policies being what they are could explain this, but I find it very odd that all the way up until now, we cannot excavate the Temple Mount. We know that there are rooms down in there from radar and everything. If somebody tried to excavate the Temple Mount, World War III would start. Okay? It is considered one of the most holiest places on earth. No one is allowed to dig there. People have died trying. So, if I had to take a guess, I would say it's there. I would say that Jeremiah hid it before the Babylonians came, somewhere in the Temple Mount that God would have told him about, or he would have known about because he was a priest, and it's still there to this day. The third option is, and of course there's fringe options all the way around, but the third option is that it was actually taken to Egypt by Jeremiah at the end of Jeremiah. After Jeremiah and all the Israelites there were killed, it eventually was taken to Ethiopia, where it is still there to this day. Now, oddly enough, there actually is a church in Ethiopia that claims to have the Ark of the Covenant. They will let nobody see it. But the one thing that I do find interesting about that is that there's one priest that is there to take care of the Ark, and every 2 years that priest goes blind from whatever radiation that thing is emitting. Like, that's not a theory, that's a fact. They go into that thing knowing that within 2 years they will be blind. Now, and not to go like ancient aliens on anybody or anything like that, but I've often said if you read how exactly they're supposed to handle the Ark of the Covenant, something tells me that there is some form of radiation emitting from that thing. Think about it. It was taken, they got some kind of bubonic plague going on. The poles that carry the Ark of the Covenant are literally designed to keep the priest away from the Ark of the Covenant. Okay? They're like this far apart from it at all times. Okay? When the priest goes in, he has to wear something that is filled with all different metals and everything, just like a radiologist would. Okay? There's something in there. What happens to Moses? When Moses in front of God and he comes out, the dude's glowing. Okay? I think there is some, and what does he say? I can't let you see me as I am because you will be evaporated. I think there is, it's not just the glory of God. I think there is this power that has some kind of effect. And that we cannot get that close to God without having some kind of ill effect. Now, when we have our new body, that ill effect will not take place. That body is meant to be in front of God. This one is not. So again, that's kind of like, a weird fringe theory, but you can read the Bible and you can see that there is something to that thought. But that's what's going on with all of this. When he sits there and like we just talked about the prayer of dedication and everything like that, of all this stuff that he's talking about, he knows his people so well because all of this is going to happen. He knows that his people are going to fail. He knows that his people are going to be captured. He knows that his people are going to let down God, and God's going to say, yeah, by the way, your neighbors have something to say. He knows this is going to happen. And he's just asking God when it does happen. And notice his language. That's why I love this prayer so much. Not when they ask for forgiveness, just forgive them. No. When they turn back to you with their hearts. And it even says parenthetically, because only you know their heart. And that's one of the things that I've tried to teach ever since I started teaching this with you guys and everything, is why we do what we do matters. It is our heart, not our words. Why? What's going on in here? The Bible tells us in everything that God loves a humble and contrite heart. We will be no closer to God than when we are broken right here. And we go to God with a broken heart, and God says, this I can use. But if we go to God with a proud heart, or we go to God with an expectant heart of like, well, I did say the words, that means I get in heaven. God can't use that. God has no love for that. So,
Brian, how many how long, once they enter the promised land, did Solomon become king, do you think?
After they came into the promised land?
Yeah.
Wasn't very long. Yeah, it was, it was hundreds of years and everything, but it wasn't too terribly long, because you had Joshua, and then after Joshua, it probably tells you right in the beginning of 1 Samuel. So let's see, 1 Samuel, because you have Joshua comes into the land, they divide the land, and then in 1 Samuel, it doesn't give you an exact date unless I got to look for it.
Within a couple hundred years, you think?
Yeah, it wasn't very long at all. Not by biblical standards and everything. Yeah, it wasn't like 1,000 years later or anything like that. I don't even know if it was a couple hundred years. So, if you're going by trying to remember all the dates and everything, if you're going by what the Bible would teach, The Exodus happened in 1440. I think 1490. I think it's 14. No, it's 1290. I think it's 1440. Well, you have to understand, you have sometimes after Israel was divided into the northern kingdom and southern kingdom, about 930 years. You have to understand that there's different dates. So you have the date that conventional people would sit there and say this stuff happened. And like right now, people are sitting there saying that Jesus Christ died or was born in the year -6 BC. Because now they're telling time differently than it's ever been. Time was literally named after Christ, and they're altering it. So now they're saying that he would have been crucified sometime around 28, 27 AD. Or actually, it's not even called AD because that's Year of Our Lord. Now they call it Common Era, CE. Yeah. So to sit there and give you an exact date and everything, plus, like I said, archaeology will argue that the Exodus happened in 1290, where if you're going by the dates that we know of consistently in the Bible, the Exodus actually took place in the 1400s, around 1440, I think. But, yeah, I'd have to look. But I know it's not very long. It's not like 1,000 years or anything like that. But anyway, so you have Joshua. Once you have Joshua, eventually the people get kind of restless. They want a king, and then that's when you're jumping right into 1 Samuel. And that's when they're sitting there saying, okay, fine, they want a king, give them a king. So, let's see here. Where was I? The dedication. Okay, so we got a little bit more time. Says, the king and all Israel with him offered sacrifices before the Lord. Solomon offered a sacrifice of fellowship of offerings to the Lord, 22,000 cattle and 120,000 sheep and goats. So all the king and the Israelites dedicated the temple of the Lord. And on that same day, the king consecrated the middle part of the courtyard in front of the temple of the Lord, and there he offered burnt offerings, grain offerings, and fat offerings, of fellowship offerings, and the fat of the fellowship offerings, because the bronze altar that stood before the Lord was too small to hold the burnt offerings and the grain offerings and the fat of the fellowship offerings. So Solomon observed the festival at that time, and all Israel with him, and a vast assembly, people from Lebo, Hamath, and the Wadi of Egypt. They celebrated it before the Lord our God for 7 days, and 7 days more, 14 days in all. And on the following day he sent the people away. They blessed the king, and then went home joyful and glad in the heart for all the good things the Lord had done for his servant David and his people Israel. So now God is going to appear to Solomon and kind of give him, what's going on in God's mind as opposed to what's actually, Solomon's doing. It says, Solomon had finished building the temple of the Lord and the royal palace and achieved all he had desired to do. And the Lord appeared to him a second time as he appeared to him at Gibeon. And the Lord said to him, I have heard the prayer and the plea that you have made before me, the one we were just talking about. And I have consecrated this temple which you have built, by putting my name there forever. My eyes and my heart will always be there. As for you, if you walk before me faithfully with integrity of heart and uprightness, as David your father did, and do all that I command and observe my decrees and laws, I will establish your royal throne over Israel forever. As I promised David your father when I said, you shall never fail to have a successor on the throne of Israel. But if you or your descendants turn away from me and do not observe the commands and decrees that I have given you and go off to serve other gods and worship them, then I will cut off Israel from the land that I have given them, and I will reject this temple that I have consecrated for my name. Israel will then become a byword and an object of ridicule among all the peoples. And this temple will become a heap of rubble, and all who pass by it will be appalled and will scoff and say, why has the Lord done such a thing to this land and to this temple? People will answer, because they have forsaken the Lord their God, who brought their ancestors out of Egypt, and have embraced other gods, worshiping and serving them. That is why the Lord brought all this disaster on them. And when he says this, you guys truthfully, I don't really get into this kind of history very much and everything, because once we get past like the Babylonian and the Persian captivity, we get into, the Turkish and all this kind of stuff, and my history kind of starts waning at that point. But there was, if I remember correctly, I can't remember who exactly it was. I think it was a president but they were actually taking like a tour of this area of the world, and they were passing by what is now known as Israel. And exactly what God says is almost exactly what he writes. Like, what did these people do to make God do this to this land? It was a swamp. It was a wasteland. When they came back, when the Israelites came back, the first problem that they had was, in fact, it was a swamp. It was filled with mosquitoes. And what they did is they actually used great big pumps to drain out the water. And then the other thing that they did was they started getting literally millions of trees. And it was a particular type of tree that would absorb the water. That was the first thing they had to deal with. Okay, this area of the world and everything was, it was just trash. And that's exactly what he says is going to happen. He says, if you or your ancestors turn to other gods. Well, guess what? That's exactly what happens, and it doesn't take long. Solomon himself does it. Rehoboam basically splits the two kingdoms, and as soon as the two kingdoms split, Jeroboam, who was actually an insurrectionist, takes lead over the other 10 kingdoms, and he sets up a golden calf all the way up north and all the way down south. And then you have the Dan and Beersheba. And people, instead of going to the altar of the Lord and the temple of the Lord, they're going to these two golden calves. And they're worshiping what they think is God. They think God's cool with that. They're just like, well, we can't go there, we got to go here. Even though God specifically says you do not offer sacrifices anywhere but here. So it's this messed up situation that's going on, but he sits there and he tells them right here, and the words are like almost haunting when he sits there and he says, Israel will then become a byword and an object of ridicule among people. This temple will become a heap of rubble, which it does. All who pass by will be appalled and will scoff and say, why did the Lord do such a thing to this land and to this temple? And that's exactly what happens, like literally. People walked by this place and they would remember God, the God of the Israelites, and they would look at this and they go, man, what did these people do? But God brings them back. And he allows them to come back. He allows them to reestablish themselves. And now they have, they're small, but as far as like power goes and everything, they're almost right up there with the United States of America. They have been bombed, missiles going off and everything, and almost very few of them even touched them because of their Iron Dome. They have incredible global influence, but the thing that is absolute certain between what the Bible talks about and what is actually going on in reality right now is the fact that you either love them or you hate them. Okay, they are a polarizing entity. You were either on the side of Israel or you were completely and totally against them, and you think they are murderers and they are genocide and they are racist, they're bigots, they think they're so special and everything. It is incredibly wild to see the two different ways of looking at this. We literally in this country have had people come out of colleges and literally keep, chanting and everything from the ocean, or what is it, from the river to the sea? Yeah, which basically means let Palestine eradicate everything that is Israel. Like, who does that? But people do it because they hate Israel. But the thing is, though, is that the reason why they hate Israel is because they hate God. That's really what it stems from. It is Satan getting inside their heart and railing against the people that are God's people. And, I've talked a little bit before about this whole replacement theory and all this kind of stuff and everything, that people think that, the church has replaced Israel and God's done with Israel. Read your Bible. Guess what? The evangelists that are here at the end of days, it ain't us. Whether you believe in the rapture, whether you don't believe in the rapture, that is completely and totally irrelevant. What it talks about in the Bible is the ones that are going out that are being persecuted like you can't even imagine, that are sitting there and praising and preaching the word of Jesus Christ in the name of Jesus Christ. That's the Jews. That's not us. So that's, to sit there and say that God has given up on his chosen people, that's just ridiculous. Where are we at here?
9.
10, okay.
Yeah, you just said.
Says, we got a few more minutes. I don't know if I get to the end of it, but it says, at the end of 20 years, during which Solomon built these two buildings, the temple of the Lord and the royal palace, King Solomon gave 20 towns to Galilee to Hiram, king of Tyre, because Hiram had supplied him with all the cedar and juniper and gold he wanted. But when Hiram went from Tyre to see the towns that Solomon had given him, he was not pleased with them. What kind of towns are these that you have given me, my brother? He asked. He called them the land of Cabal, or basically wasteland or trash. It says a name they have to this day. Now Hiram has sent to the king 120 talents of gold. So it says, here's the account of the forced labor King Solomon conscripted to build the Lord's temple, his own palace, terraces, walls of Jerusalem. And then it just goes down a whole list of these people and what they did. Verse 20, it says, there were still people left from the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. These people were not Israelites. And Solomon conscripted the descendants of all these peoples remaining in the land, whom the Israelites could not exterminate, to serve as slave labor, as it is to this day. Now, here's the thing, that's fine. God never makes a command in everything about not making any other people slaves. He says you do not make Israelites slaves. So it says, but Solomon did not make slaves of any of the Israelites. They were his fighting men, his government, his officials, his officers, his captains, and the commanders of his chariots and charioteers. And they were also the chief officials in charge of Solomon's projects, 550 officials supervising those who did the work. Well, it sits there and says that God didn't make slaves out of any of the Israelites. Well, I guess this is where we have to define slaves. Because when you're telling somebody that you have to work on something and you're going to get paid exactly what I tell you to get paid and you're going to work on it for exactly how long I tell you you're going to work on it, and if you don't, then there's going to be serious consequences. I don't know what else you would call that. Now, some people would look at that and say, well, the Bible's wrong, it's contradicting and everything. Not necessarily. We have to understand who's writing it, and we have to understand what God wants us to get out of it. Okay? So the people and everything that were not tradesmen, he never made slaves. He made them into all this stuff and everything. But like I said, this is one of the things that will divide the kingdom, is the conscripted labor. So it says, after Pharaoh's daughter had come up from the city of David to the palace of Solomon and built for her, he constructed the terraces. 3 times a year Solomon sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings on the altar that he had built for the Lord, burning incense before the Lord along with them, and so fulfilled the temple obligations. King Solomon also built ships at Ezion Geber, which is near Elath and Edom, on the shore of the Red Sea. Hiram sent his men, sailors who knew the sea, to serve in the fleet with Solomon's men, and they sailed to Ophir and brought back 420 talents of gold, which they delivered to King Solomon. So the main thing we need to get out of this is, like I said, he basically gives as a gift and everything, or as payment really, these towns to Hiram. Hiram basically goes and looks at it and says, this is not what I was expecting. We can kind of see this kind of parallel and everything with what we talked about before, with like how we're supposed to give, or even what happens with Cain and Abel. Okay, Hiram gave his best. Hiram was true to his word. He gave his best trees. He gave his best workers. We just heard about the people that he let go and work on these projects. These were his best people. And then Solomon gives his leftovers. These towns were junk. They would never make any money in taxes. They were probably worthless as far as anything for mining or whatever. They had no value to them whatsoever. He gave them the trash. So if you actually look at the geological aspect of this and everything, if I remember correctly, these towns are kind of up north. So it wasn't like he gave them choice towns throughout the land. He gave them all the junk that was up here. Okay? So, and Hiram calls him out on this. But again, that doesn't mean that the relationship goes sideways and everything. But one of them is true to his word. One of them is actually doing what he's supposed to be doing. The other one is just like, well, here you go. Here's my leftovers. Again, we see Solomon continue to go down this path. He has the wisdom of God. That's the messed up thing. It's not that he's just some kind of super genius doing whatever he wants to do. He has the wisdom of God. But he's using that wisdom for the wrong reasons. We can kind of see that in our own lives to some degree and everything. Every person here and every person that believes in Jesus Christ has been given a gift to use for God. That doesn't mean you have to use it for God. And so God gives us the free will to use it how we wish. So you can use it for your own personal gain. God doesn't appreciate that too much, but we're seeing Solomon do the exact same thing here. He's praying to God, he's praying for his people, but his own personal decisions just seem to get shadier and shadier and shadier. So, all right, we'll go ahead and we'll get out of here. So when we come back, we'll start in 10. So we're going to be gone for the next 2 weeks, I think, if I remember correctly. So for the next 2 weeks, read up on the rest of the story and everything and get some questions. You guys may have some questions about Sheba and Solomon. So we'll talk about that. But at the end of the day, we'll be back in a couple weeks. I'm sure I'll have a few stories. Probably get kicked by somebody down there or something like that. Probably say the wrong word. I'm really worried about that. Because I'm not, in case you guys can't figure it out, I'm not one of those kind of people that know how to shut up real quick. So when I say something wrong, I'm just going to keep going. You guys didn't have to respond in that way. Okay. All right. Let us get out of here, and I hope you guys have a great 2 weeks, and hopefully I won't die on a plane. Oh, well, yeah, you guys will be with me, man. Oh, let me pray real quick, and we got to talk. Okay.
You're in trouble now.
Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this class. Truly, it is one of the greatest joys of my life, and I thank you so much that you have given me the honor of doing this. Lord, please be with everybody here over the next couple weeks. Keep them safe, keep them healthy, keep them warm. Just be with them all. Please be with us as we go to this strange place, doing everything we can to preach the name of your great Son. So bless us in that, Lord. We thank you for everything that you have done for us. Lord, we love you. We praise you so much, and we thank you. And we pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.